He was born in a big white farmhouse in Myra, West Virginia, just up the Mud River from the Lincoln County seat of Hamlin, one day after Lincoln's birthday in 1923. He was an average student, learned mechanics from his father, and loved to sneak away to hunt and fish. When World War II came, he joined the Army Air Corps as an aircraft mechanic. But by war's end, he was an ace fighter pilot and destined for glory in the air. He was the first man to break the speed of sound in the Bell X-1. He won nearly every aviation award, a Peacetime Congressional Medal of Honor, and was the youngest man enshrined into the Aviation Hall of Fame. His name, Charles Elwood Yeager, and he is a legend of air power. Chuck was an easygoing boy at Hamlin High School, good at math and typing, played the trombone, and played both football and basketball. But when school was out, you'd find Chuck down by the Mud River with his fishing pole, or out in the woods hunting with his .22 rifle.
Chuck and I used to loan all these hills. We hunt all these hills, squirrel hunt, or what have you. And old Chuck will never forget it. And on this ridge back here was the Devil's Head, what they call the Devil's Head. We used to go back there. They had a carving in this. And then back this way is the Mall Rock, about 2 miles back in these mountains. Chuck and I used to go back in there, and not only him, but a lot of other boys and girls with us. When we grew up and around in this community, we had a real good time. We didn't have no cars to run around in like they do today, but we did enjoy the hills and the mountains, picking blackberries and what have you.
When high school ended in the summer of 1941, young Yeager immediately joined the Army Air Corps and left home for training in September. He was trained as an aircraft mechanic, first at Mather Field, California, and then at nearby Moffett Field, where he was an AT-6 crew chief. While at Moffett, he applied for the Flying Sergeants Program, and just 3 days before the attack on Pearl Harbor, he passed his first flight physical and awaited selection. He subsequently was transferred to Victorville, California, as a crew chief on an AT-11, an aircraft used to train bombardiers. And in the spring of 1942, it became the first airplane he ever got a ride in. Corporal Yeager was selected for flight school in July of 1942. He attended primary school at Ryan Field, Hemet, California, and basic school at Gardner Field, Taft, California. Graduation from Luke Field, Arizona in March 1943, Flight Officer Yeager was assigned to the 363rd Fighter Squadron, 357th Fighter Group, Tonopah, Nevada, flying Bell P-39 Era Cobras.
That was up Tonopah in 43 with P-39. The old rancher had about a 20-foot cottonwood up there in front of his house, and he said he wanted to take out. I took it out with a P-39 wing. I was up there last year, and that tree's still there. It's about 8 feet in diameter, and the branches about 6 feet above the ground where we cut it down. I told the maintenance officer I had a bird. He said it must have been carrying a nest with it.
The fighter group trained at several airfields throughout the West, including Oroville, California. It was in Oroville that Chuck met his future wife, Glennis Stickhouse. Glennis was the social director for the town's USO, and she planned a dance at Chuck's request for the other pilots in the group so they could meet the local girls. Chuck took Glennis. In November 1943, Chuck's fighter group departed Casper, Wyoming for Leiston, England, and their first taste of combat. The group was now flying the North American P-51 Mustang, escorting bombers deep into Europe. On March 4th, 1944, Yeager claimed his first victory, a Messerschmitt Me-109 over Berlin. Celebration was short-lived. The very next day, on his 9th mission, while flying Tail End Charlie on another bomber escort mission over France, a Focke-Wulf 190 shot down Yeager's P-51, Glamorous Glen. Although Chuck was slightly wounded, he evaded German patrols looking for him. And with the help of an old French woodcutter, he was hidden and handed over to the French underground, who eventually moved him to the Pyrenees, where he and other downed aircrew continued to evade into Spain. His final trek to freedom included a hair-raising escape from a German patrol. Once in Spain, he was repatriated with the 357th Fighter Group by mid-May. Regulations prohibited evadees to go back to combat, but Yeager insisted, all the way up the chain of command until he got permission directly from General Eisenhower himself. He returned to his squadron in Leiston, flew 56 more combat missions, shot down 11 more German aircraft, 9 in 2 missions, 5 Me-109s on 1 mission, and 4 FW-190s in another. 13 in all, including Germany's famed jet, the Me-262. From July to October 1944, Yeager was promoted to second lieutenant, first lieutenant, and captain. Captain Chuck Yeager returned to the United States in February 1945 and went directly to California, picked up Glennis, and took her home to meet his folks. They were married in the parlor of his home in Hamlin on February 26. After a honeymoon in California, he was assigned as an instructor pilot to Perrin Field, Texas. That didn't last long. In July, the Yeagers arrived at Wright Field, where Chuck became the maintenance officer in the Fighter Test Branch Flight Test Division, and was soon participating in test projects on the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star and the Republic P-84 Thunderjet, America's first operational jet fighters. Young Captain Yeager impressed Colonel Albert Boyd, the chief of the Flight Test Division, with his jet air shows he was flying and his understanding of the maintenance needs of airplanes. In December 1945, Colonel Boyd asked Chuck if he'd like to attend test pilot school. When he graduated in August 1947, he was sent to Muroc Air Base, California, as the project pilot for the Bell XS-1.
I remember in looking at the airplane, I said, man, that thing got speed written all over it, and it did.
In October 1947, at Muroc Desert Test Center in California, history is made by this aircraft, the XS-1, and its pilot, Captain Charles E. Yeager.
I only flew the X-1 about twice a week. And it was fun because I didn't have to work on a lot of other test programs when I got to fly the X-1.
This airplane and this pilot are about to be the first ever to fly faster than the speed of sound. A B-29 will take the XS-1 aloft and launch her at an altitude of about 35,000 feet. The XS-1 is not a military aircraft, but a flying research laboratory designed to test the effects of supersonic flight upon airplanes. It is powered by 4 rocket engines. Its weight empty is less than 5,000 pounds, but it carries 8,000 pounds of fuel. B-29s have done a lot of memorable things, but none of them ever before had a mission quite like this one. And no airplane ever did what the XS-1 is about to do. Cracking the sound barrier in level flight will be more than a spectacular feat. It will also give the Air Force valuable knowledge of the resources of new propulsive systems. Captain Yeager gets aboard the XS-1. It can't be a long flight he's going to have in the little aircraft. At full power, the flight can't last more than 2.5 minutes. But it's going to be a fast one.
I didn't give any thought to whether or not we were going to get above Mach 1. It just, duty was paramount in my mission.
The radar crews are ready, too, to do the timing. The only possible method for timing aircraft at extremely high altitudes. There she goes. A big moment in a history-making flight. Now she's approaching the barrier. The speed of sound at 35,000 feet is 660 miles per hour. The really big moment. Through the sound barrier. The first time ever.
One thing we found out with the X-1, since it was the first airplane to ever get into the region of the speed of sound and exceed the speed of sound, was that on the horizontal stabilizer, or the tail plane of the airplane, shock waves were forming. And as we got up to about 94% of the speed of sound, these shock waves were right at the hinge point of the elevator. And consequently, we lost our elevator effectiveness. And the X-1 had the capability of moving its whole horizontal stabilizer. And that was the way we got the airplane through Mach 1.
For breaking the speed of sound, President Harry Truman presented Captain Chuck Yeager with America's most prestigious aviation award, the Robert J. Collier Trophy for the greatest achievement in aeronautics, and the McKay Trophy for the most meritorious flight of the year. During the next 2 years, Captain Yeager flew the X-1 more than 40 flights, exceeded 1,000 miles per hour, and 70,000 feet. In December 1953, Major Yeager flew the Bell X-1A to 1,650 miles per hour, or 2.5 times the speed of sound. The record almost cost him his life. The X-1A went uncontrollable at 80,000 feet and spun down to 25,000 feet in 51 seconds before Major Yeager was able to regain control and land on the Mojave Lake bed. For his new speed record, Yeager was awarded the Harmon International Trophy by President Eisenhower and was selected one of the 10 outstanding young men of 1953 by the United States Junior Chamber of Commerce. Earlier in 1953, Major Yeager accompanied General Boyd to Kadena Air Base, Okinawa, to fly and evaluate a North Korean MiG-15 whose pilot had defected. Yeager considered this assignment to be one of the most dangerous of his flying career. The MiG was put through every possible test to evaluate the airplane's capability, and they did it all during a severe tropical storm. In October 1954, after more than 9 years of flight test work, Major Yeager became 417th Fighter Bomber Squadron Commander, an F-86 squadron at Hahn Air Base, Germany, and later Toul-Rosières, France. During his tour, he took first-place honors in air-to-air and air-to-ground gunnery, ensuring that his wing won the 1956 fighter weapons gunnery meet held in Europe.
I think that Chuck Yeager thinks of himself primarily as a fighter pilot, more than he even thinks of himself as a test pilot. And his combat record certainly indicates this. You know, here was a man who, people who have flown with him and opponents who flew against him have all reflected that this individual was extraordinarily gifted as a combat pilot, and indeed is extraordinarily gifted as an airman today.
September 1957, Chuck and his family left Europe and returned to the high California desert at George Air Base, just 50 miles from Edwards. Lieutenant Colonel Yeager became the squadron commander of 2 North American F-100 squadrons in succession, the 1st Tactical Fighter Squadron and the 306 Tactical Fighter Squadron. During his days at George, Yeager took his squadrons throughout the world, participating in TAC Strike Force exercises. His squadrons crossed the Atlantic non-stop 2 times, once to serve as an air defense force for the Strategic Air Command at Morón, Spain, and the other in Italy on special weapons alerts. He attended the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama in 1960, and was promoted to full colonel in March 1961. After War College, Chuck Yeager returned to the Air Force Flight Test Center at Edwards, and in June 1962 became the commandant of the United States Air Force Aerospace Research Pilot School.
Engine is used at carefully calculated intervals to boost acceleration. When the aircraft nears the apex of the zoom maneuver and reaches an altitude at which dynamic pressure becomes too low for conventional aerodynamic controls, the reaction controls are activated. At the altitudes attained by the NF-104A, he enjoys a unique view, a byproduct of his mission. The sight is familiar to the astronauts, and now, because of the Zoom flight program, to these future astronauts in training at the Aerospace Pilot School.
As well as future experimental aircraft test pilots. He continued to lead by example, involved in every type of aircraft testing, including the M2 lifting body, the concept vehicle used to study the re-entry needs of future aircraft and spacecraft, such as the present-day Space Shuttle.
The legacy of Chuck Yeager, I think, can really be found in today's test pilots. You know, these are individuals that are highly trained, highly skilled individuals. There has been talk about the so-called right stuff. I think the danger when we look at the test pilot in a strictly popular sense is confusing the sense of recklessness with the sense of adventure. If you look at the history of flight testing and flight research, recklessness has never had a part in it. Chuck Yeager was a supremely adventurous, extremely crafty and shrewd individual, but never a reckless one.
In July 1966, Colonel Yeager returned to operational flying when he became the commander of the 405th Fighter Wing, a B-57 wing at Clark Air Base, Republic of the Philippines, but with 5 squadrons assigned all over Southeast Asia. Even though the job kept him moving, Yeager still managed to fly 127 missions in South Vietnam. In 1969, Yeager became the commander of the 4th Tactical Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, and was promoted to Brigadier General. While commander of the 4th Tactical Fighter Wing, he led his unit to South Korea to bolster other forces after the North Koreans captured the USS Pueblo and its crew. His next assignments carried him and his family back to Germany, where he was vice commander of the 16th Air Force, then on to Pakistan as U.S. defense representative to that country. General Yeager's last assignment was as Director of Aerospace Safety for the Air Force Inspection and Safety Center at Norton Air Force Base, California. He retired in February 1975.
This man is one of the genuine heroes of the air age. He's a legendary person in terms of his piloting ability and his test pilot acumen in the same sense that we think of, say, Jimmy Doolittle. And just as Doolittle played a transforming role in the development of aviation technology in the 1920s and 1930s, we certainly see Chuck Yeager doing that in the 1940s into the 1950s.
But this was by no means the last we heard of Chuck Yeager. General Yeager continued to test aircraft as a consultant for the Air Force, NASA, and many major aircraft companies.
We've come a long ways in the last 40-some years when we first started flying Mustangs against the Germans back in 1943, 44, and 45. A lot of things have changed in modern aircraft. We went through a big evolution. After breaking the sound barrier at the X-1, we had airplanes that would fly at supersonic speeds like the F-100 would go out to about 1.3 Mach number. You get in, you shoot, and you get out.
30,000 feet at about 0.95 Mach and going AB now.
50 years to the minute after breaking the barrier in the experimental aircraft named Glamorous Glennis, Chuck Yeager made history once again in the skies over the Mojave Desert.
And we just went through Mach 1.
This anniversary of supersonic flight was about more than just a machine and the speeds it reached above Edwards Air Force Base. This anniversary was instead a time to honor a man who had the courage to fly into the unknown. This anniversary also signaled the end to a test flight career for General Yeager.
What I can say is that what I am, I owe to the Air Force.
Chuck Yeager did it all in airplanes and research flying. An ace in World War II, the first to break the speed of sound, he won nearly every aviation award available, received a special peacetime Congressional Medal of Honor, and was the youngest person ever enshrined in the Aviation Hall of Fame. And for this, he is a legend of air power.